Well, but first up, it's time for Sammy Rangel to join us. Sammy Rangel is really a living, breathing metaphor and example for change and transformation and hope. His life story, one day, hopefully it'll be on a big screen somewhere and I could sit next to him on opening night and hold his hand and give him a big hug, or maybe just in the same row, maybe in the row behind him, and I'll be going like this. His story is incredible. He overcame abuse and neglect as a child to be an international leader at the forefront of helping people walk away from extremism and hate. After being involved in gang life in Chicago and prison life in Wisconsin, he got his master's in social work. He founded Formers Anonymous, which is an incredible group. And now he is the executive director of Life After Hate. Along the way, Sammy made a TED Talk about his story called The Power of Forgiveness. And it's both, it's touching, it's horrific, it's beautiful, it's so complex. And Sammy went on to then take his story, which he shares in that TED Talk to a certain degree. He also put that into a book called Four Bears that you can get. And then he turned it into a play. And my wife, Clever Action Company member Sandra Delgado, worked with Sammy to stage that piece, which he then went on to perform in 2018 at the Goodman Theater in our Peace Book Festival in front of his two lovely daughters. And now he joins us here on Crucial Connections. Sammy, it's great to see you. I know you do a lot of Zoom stuff. You're normally traveling around the world in an airplane, and now you're doing it on your computer. Good to see you, brother. Thanks for taking time for us.
God, man, I told you earlier, man, I wish I could hug you guys right now, man. I miss you guys. You know, you're a big part of my family, a big part of my life, and I'm inspired by what you do.
Oh, likewise. You know, I feel like our relation is one of those where we give each other more than we take. And at the same time, I know you've changed me forever. And here we are, you know, it's 2020. We've been in the midst of a real interesting narrative, to say the least, as far as the power balance between love and hate in this country. We've seen hatred and white supremacy raised to new levels of visibility and just vitriol. We now find ourselves in a pandemic where everybody, as Phenom, who was on our show 2 weeks ago, everybody has PTSD now, you know, and the lines are being drawn again. We've lost another Black life to senseless violence that was captured on a cell phone and has been shown around the world once again. What can you tell us, being the executive director of Life After Hate? I want to just start by getting your perspective on, you know, what's happening now. What are the trends that you're seeing, and what kind of work are you doing to help somebody who realizes that they've gone too far into a life of hate and they're looking to walk down that plank?
Well, you know, first of all, thanks, you know, for that, you know, and for telling important stories, because like us, I think the one thing we certainly do have in common is that we're trying to introduce a narrative in a time where dialogue has really become next to impossible to have, right? And so trying to find safe ways to introduce these topics and potential solutions, man. And you asked about the trends that we're seeing right now. It's really, I think, it's a sad time to see these hate groups from what we call the violent far right, domestic terrorism born here in the U.S. Racially motivated, politically motivated, and then sprinkled with some religious stuff in there as well. And what we're seeing is like this attempt to kind of capitalize on this pandemic to push vulnerable communities to a tipping point. you know, you know, there, I mean, it could be I've seen some really, some information come across my desk where they want to go to vulnerable communities and just shoot, fire guns off in the community, not at anyone in particular, but knowing that that triggers a response, and that triggers anxiety, and that triggers, panic and fear, right? And trying to introduce these things. They call it accelerism, and I'm giving a really basic introduction to that. And it's, how do we speed up the process to push these communities to a tipping point? Also, how do we weaponize COVID-19, in order to use against these masses? And targeting Black and Hispanic impoverished communities, right? It's pretty silly, and to think that we would use something that is making everyone vulnerable and try to use that as a way to push vulnerabilities even further, to exploit these vulnerabilities, to overwhelm these communities with these vulnerabilities. That's what we're kind of seeing right now. And of course, this happens primarily through, avenues like the internet, which are used as vehicles for delivering this hate at the speed of light, right? Like, what used to take months and years, you can now binge over a weekend, right, and consume all of that. And so they're able to even trigger and recruit in much quicker ways and methods, and even be able to reach audiences that were, exempt, because, you might be doing your job and keeping your kid out of these bad neighborhoods from these bad crowds. But when it comes to the online portion of it, we're all exposed and we're all vulnerable, and it can look innocent enough, right? I think the other trend is that it doesn't start with racism. Their talking point is not about racism, or there's not even racist views. It might be a shared concern. It might be a shared grievance. It might be something like COVID. Like, here's something that is being what would I call it, like exploited, right, in a way that's it's not a natural correlation, but they've made it one, and it's become like a culture war, which is really code for like a race war, that's become a component of this race war that they want to see, and that they promote and profess is coming and is inevitable. And so most people don't even know that they're being groomed. And by the time they realize it, it's often, too little, too late. And many, many times they find it difficult to be able to turn back at a certain point.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Thank you for all of that. I also think about the race riot of 1919, where Irish men in Chicago were caught putting shoe polish on their faces and lighting garages in the Irish neighborhood, and so that their fellow Irish folks would see them and say, a bunch of Black people came and burned down this garage, let's go burn down their neighborhood. And that's what they did. Over 1,000 homes were burnt down to the ground in Black neighborhoods in the race riot. So correct me if I'm wrong, though. The Obama administration approved a large federal grant for Life After Hate to specifically create online platforms to help intervene with people who might be getting pulled down the rabbit hole of hate. And then that grant was taken away by the new administration, and you have been working hard to continue that work and fill in the blanks of that story a little bit, and then tell us, what happens today if somebody calls up and says, "Hey, I've gone too far. I need help."
We back in 2016 were awarded just under $500,000 to do this work that we're doing now, to combat violent extremism from the violent far right, to help stop acts of domestic terrorists and mass atrocities and hate crimes here in the U.S. as it pertains to white supremacy. And then under this administration, the public notice was that, we no longer met the new criteria, but, and it really became a law enforcement approach rather than a combined, like multidisciplinary approach to the issue, which is really important. You can't just have a law enforcement incentive. You have to have community. In fact, I would say community has to come first, because we're the ones that are informing a lot of the processes after that, after our arrival, right? We're the ones boots on the ground. However, It was almost the best thing that could have happened to us. One, it woke up the country to realize that this issue is much bigger than what the administration can fix. I've always said that we can't rely on government and law enforcement to solve what's going on in our neighborhoods. You know, we have to take ownership and control of those initiatives. And I honestly want to be in charge of that. I don't want to leave my future or fate to anyone else. If I'm living there, I want to be the one who has a voice in that process. I don't want to just be a part of the movement without having a say or a part in it. Today, though, in the last 2 years, Anthony, we have grown from one stipend part-time position to 12 staff. 5 of those staff are concentrated on doing direct services and outreach through our Exit USA program. You know, for the first time, we have a director of development who's helping us, do the work that's important to keep the lights on and the services flowing. We basically, this was started by what we call formers, other men and women who were once a part of hate groups in the past, such as myself. And we've given that control up to partnering with people who are academics and professionals and accountants and think tanks. We've brought in all of that, man, because we know that we couldn't do it alone, right? And we needed to help. So I think that is a worthy mention, because it shows that we're starting to realize how we need to integrate with our communities to have the best effect, right? Knowing good partners. Once we have those services in place like we do now, people are able to come to us. They're able to get partnered with a mental health provider who we've trained and leveled up in, because there is no special education or training programs out there for working with men and women from these populations. There's plenty of programs for gang intervention. There's plenty of programs for drug and alcohol or, sex offenses, whatever, but there is nothing to help people deal with white supremacy, right? And so most people don't know what to do when that's the main reason somebody's coming to see you, right? So we're teaching professionals across the country how to engage in this space after they've learned how to identify what's happening in this space, right? And so now these people are able to come in and get the services that are competent, that are compassionate, that are empathic, but that also drive healthy boundaries, limits, and accountability as well, right? Like you do have to answer for what you've done. And oftentimes it's a personal process that you have to go through. That's what we would call de-radicalization, right? We're helping people break from that hateful ideology and change that into being able to, 1, work on yourself, 2, give back to your community, and 3, live a peaceful life, and blending, integrating with your community fully, not just stopping the hate and then, blending back into obscurity, but giving back. We owe that. We're big on the service that we owe the communities. And so we push people that at their own speed, when you're ready, the anonymity has to give way for transparency. And in order to have true healing, you have to have dialogue in order to get to that point of reconciliation.
Wow.
Without that dialogue, you can't really heal.
I mean, just, as you sit here and talk to me and the world so eloquently and intelligently about these super complex things that you are on the frontier of, like you said, they're not training people how to deal with white supremacists. To then think about your life as a young child and running away and being in a gang and eventually being on segregation in the basement of Supermax in Wisconsin. When you meditate, you must just be like, what? Your subconscious must be like, this was a ride. Your spirit's been in many bodies, but never one like this before. How are you able to take that in at all, or are you just in the middle of it? I mean, how do you find time to reflect and take in the incredible journey that you are in the middle of?
I'm saying this with all sincerity. I have to lay the success that I have had towards my own insights, my own development and growth, my professional development, at the feet of the people who I've surrounded myself with, who saw beyond the symptoms of my problems and saw the person that I could be inside, even before I could see it. I'm taking that same, at Life After Hate and all the other initiatives I've been involved in over the years, we take that same stance when it comes to serving and standing with the condemned, standing with what we would think are incorrigible groups or populations, like everyone who's been written off in this situation or in this lifestyle, we stand with them, because I was written off, you know, and for good reason. I don't want to sound like I ever felt like I was innocent. Like I gave very little choice to a lot of the systems that dealt with me, but at the same time, I'm also a product of those systems. And so I have to take ownership for my part. The systems have to take ownership for their part. And when we facilitate that process, I think examples like mine become commonplace rather than rarities, right? So when we have the ability to forgive and to be forgiving as a country, as an institution, as a person, that allows for love. That allows for me to become loving again. It allows me to be able to put down what I think are strengths for real strengths, such as being able to be open about my past, be willing and courageous in going down that path, and then ultimately my commitment to that path, right? Which for me is really, like in my Formers Anonymous program, stems from 3 pillars: forgiveness, reconciliation, and ultimately what the community will award me through that process is my redemption.
Wow.
And I think as a person who has come so far, I'm not the only one who can do this if we could just as a community stay hopeful about a person's capacity to change.
If there's anyone in our Zoom room who wants to ask Sammy a question, be brave. Sammy is. We would love to have you come on. Just tell Luca in the chat. In the meantime, Dr. Slick, Dr. Marcus Robinson, do either of you have a question for Sammy Rangel?
Sure, I'll go. Is that okay with you, Dr. Marcus?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Right on, right on. Sammy, it's just so refreshing and beautiful to hear you. Thank you for sharing your story. I would like to know, under the spirit of forgiveness, and especially forgive yourself, if you could go back to your 23-year-old self, knowing what you know right now, what would you say?
Take your time, Sammy. Her questions are so good.
Obviously. If I was somebody I could listen to, I would have to tell myself that I'm better than this. I honestly thought that was the life for me. I really didn't see a way out. There was no hope. There was no plan for a future. And I thought I was justified in every position and stance I had because of what I had experienced and what had been done to me. I didn't realize that I had other choices I could make. It's not like I didn't know right from wrong, but I thought that the life I was living was the only option I had in those 2 choices. So there was no creativity, and there was really no support to be much more than what I was at that time. But there was plenty of support to remain the same.
Awesome. You are worth it. It looks like Antoine Ramon has a question. Let's bring him on. Our first ever question. Antoine, I hope your lights are on, your camera's on, your mic's on. We're doing what's known as a risky move on the Zoom, and we're going to bring you in to ask a question of Sammy.
Well,
There he is.
Hello.
Welcome to Crucial Connections, Antoine.
Thank you. First time viewer, first time listener, and I am totally in.
Thank you for joining. What's your question?
So my question for you, Sammy, is what little I know about, I want to say I like how you reference it to a life. I think it's a life of violence. I think that's a wonderful umbrella and grouping for what that is. And it expanded my understanding and even my assumption of what that could be. Because when I first read that in the description, I assumed the guest might be white So thank you for shattering that assumption for me. But my question for you is, having been in a life of violence, what was the hardest thing about removing yourself from that community that you probably had incredible roots and ties to? What was that like for you?
That's a great question. The hardest part for me, to be straightforward and honest, was believing that there was a world waiting for me that would accept me. I had a us versus them mentality and lifestyle for so long. I honestly did not feel that I would be able to transition. And to my surprise, because I was raised and my own experiences taught me that all white people were racist, and I had experiences that reinforced that. Like, I survived an actual race riot at the age of 17 in Menard Correctional Institution back in 1992 when I was 17 years old. And that reinforced all the other beliefs I had ever been raised with and it proved to me that it was us versus them. And that there were never any good people in that space. Never good people that were cops, never good people that were politicians, and never good people that were white. And I didn't go into prison with those beliefs. They were just kind of reinforced through what I witnessed and experienced in that race riot. And so when I was being asked to contemplate potential change, the hardest part for me was to believe that there would be a place for me. I would have never anticipated that I would have the kind of love and support from all types and every sectors. Like, some of my best friends are federal law enforcement and politicians, people like Collaboration and all the different people I've met in there. I'm the lead, actor right now in an organization combating white supremacists. I'm the only former who is not a white supremacist, but that just is an example that, when you're genuine and you surround yourself with genuine people, just about anything is possible. But I would not have guessed that. I took it on a gamble. I risked everything. I gave up all the power. I gave up all the money. I gave up all the glamour. I gave up the image, which was extremely difficult to let go. I had spent a lifetime building that image, if for no other reason than to protect myself. And letting that go meant giving away what I felt was my security in life. And to be honest, it was the best decision I ever made.
Hey, we wouldn't be brothers if it hadn't happened. You wouldn't be on the show. And I like your image a lot right now. And I know, because I was at the UNESCO Medal of Hope Awards when Forrest Whitaker gave you an award, and you went up to the podium and shared your story with a bunch of dignitaries.
It was surreal.
Yeah. And so, keep following your heart, man. It's definitely been on a roll this last decade and a half. And I want to just thank you for joining us and sharing your insights. And I look forward to the next chapter of our relationship. Let's give it up for Sammy Rangel, huh? And the Academy Award for the best crucial connections. He cried, he laughed, he was a doctor. He healed white supremacy. And he looks like a Hulk. Oh my gosh. And by the way, Sammy, how much weight can you lift right now?
I can deadlift about 550 pounds. I can bench press about 400.
So, thank you for joining us, brother.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you to everyone.
And how are things in Wisconsin now that the restrictions have been lifted? How do you feel about it? What's it like?
First of all, let me tell you, the restrictions weren't lifted because it's safe to go outside. It was hurting someone's bottom line. And I honestly feel that we're all going to be sacrificed for that bottom line, which is not new. This is not new, and people, don't understand that the risks have not diminished. In fact, yesterday we were the 8th fastest growing city in the country for COVID, new COVID cases. And on that same day that we were listed, we went from 10 to 8. They lifted the restrictions.
Wow.
And 40% of Latinos and 40% of African Americans make up all the COVID cases in Racine, in the city of 80,000 people. So
Wow.
that decision was, in my opinion, was not made with the interests of our people. And you know, this is a part of, you know, how we exploit this pandemic for the benefit of others, man. And it's a sad day for me. It's a sad day for me here in Racine and in Wisconsin.
Well, let's end it on a happy note.
Yeah.
We're alive, you know, and we have our work cut out for us. And I sleep better knowing there's guys like you out there. Thank you, Sammy.
You're welcome. Goodbye, everybody.